I gave a pretty similar talk a few days ago at a meetup, so I hope it's not too much overlap in the audience. But I'm Peter from the Web3 Foundation. The organization has been brought to life to make Web3 happen. From the early Ethereum days, especially, we know that there was Ethereum and Whisper and Swarm, and those are supposed to be the protocols that will enable us to build decentralized applications. And as we've been building, we learned a lot of lessons about each individual protocol and the protocols in general, and how we can build applications and what is missing in this technology stack. And we are there dedicated to help with the pieces that are currently missing and try to bring together the stack of protocols that will enable us to build decentralized applications. So I will talk a bit about how do we think about Web3 in general, and then what do we see as different pieces of it, and what do we need to push in order to get to a stage where we have useful applications built on top of it. So first, let's go back a bit to kind of why did we start building decentralized applications in the first place, and what kinds of features do decentralized applications have as opposed to regular applications. And I think a lot of people are just building regular applications now with some decentralized features, while they don't keep in mind a full kind of set of features that we want to maintain ideally at all times. We usually are able to avoid some risk associated with centralized systems. So there is no single party that controls things. So risk of breaches or dramatic increase in pricing and any other risk associated with kind of data usually flowing through one point can be avoided. It's usually much easier to interoperate. So those systems, usually the protocols kind of enable different protocols to be built on top of them and next to them, and make it much easier to build this whole stack. So we see many second layer protocols now being built and on top of projects like Ethereum, and oftentimes they enable the users of the application to own the application rather than having a central project. Like right now, usually there is a central project that develops something, but then ideally we then hand it over and the protocol kind of runs on its own out there. And we really want to make sure that there is that the protocol is specified in a way that no one is privileged a priori. So there is no single person that is able to erase everything that is going on. Oftentimes, when contracts are upgradable, let's say we end up relying on one party, or there is a party serving remotely the data from the blockchain rather than users using the blockchain directly. Each participant has their role clearly defined and can be replaced. So, for instance, if we have a centralized RPC endpoint, like it's not very straightforward to then have someone else suddenly provide data for the users of an application that make use of that. And usually the protocols are designed in such a way that the interactions are insured in a way so that it doesn't require too much trust. It's pretty frictionless to enter in agreements via smart contracts or participate in those protocols. And in order to build all those applications, we need to have a bunch of capabilities. So if you think of regular applications, let's say maybe it's not the best example of a decentralized application, but if we think of Uber, which is everyone kind of knows what are the participants, who uses it. And if you build such an application, you need to have the parties transact with each other. You need to be able to store some data to serve images to the user. You need to be able to broadcast a transient message. Hey, I want to take a ride from here to there, and I don't want to record it forever on the blockchain. So we need to, an application developer, when they build their decentralized Uber, they need to be able to have protocols that will enable them to use all those capabilities. And what is really important is okay, if let's say we build on 5 different protocols the application that we want to make, and now we want to serve it to the user, and we want them to use it in a trust-free manner. We want to use it in such a way that no one is still privileged over anyone else. And so ideally, they kind of connect directly to those protocols. And for that, they cannot run on their phone, for instance, 5 different blockchains and 2 peer-to-peer networking stacks, and then try to gather data from all of those in order to use their application. We need a way in order for protocols to come together in such a way that you can run a compact protocol stack on your phone and then serve the application through some browser or through some endpoint on user's phone. And this you can have multiple applications on top, but there is a tight protocol stack that provides all the capabilities that are needed. And this is where things like light clients come in, and this is where integrations between making sure that peer-to-peer networking layer is common for instance, for different protocols. So it doesn't require only thinking on the application layer, but also on the protocol layer. And this is why we think that it's really important to put a lot of the efforts that are currently being pursued in different directions onto kind of on a single page and basically figure out how they can all work together. Here we have a kind of, it's pre-packed from the lower layer, the lowest layer to the highest layers. The higher layers depend on the lower layers of the stack, and kind of just going through the different technologies that we think are important in order to make it all work together. So first, on the bottom, like if there are P2P protocols, we need some P2P networking for them. So we really think an extensible protocol like libp2p can supply this P2P networking layer for many different protocols. And already protocols like IPFS and Polkadot are making use of libp2p, and Ethereum as well has plans to transition to libp2p. And this is great because all the development on the P2P layer can be reused. And also, potentially, you can then reuse any discovery mechanisms, peers on each of those protocols across all of them. So you don't need to run 5 P2P networking stacks on your phone. Then we want some way to have computations that are understood by the whole network. And here, again, WebAssembly is another standard that is emerging. So there is, in Ethereum, there is push to have shards run WebAssembly. But there is also other projects that looked at it, like TrueBit, and in case of Polkadot and Party Substrate, it also makes use of WebAssembly as this computation engine. And then on top of that, we have a bunch of protocols. So then we have the layer 1 protocols, and then the second layer protocols that provide the functionality to developers. So we need blockchains, and what we found is we need potentially many different blockchains. There are some blockchains that enable us certain capabilities, and some other ones other ones. So like there is something like Ethereum that provides general purpose smart contracts, and it's great for especially at for prototyping and for applications that require complex logic. But there are networks, for instance, like Blink, that enable very fast transactions processing and parallel transaction processing, maybe with different security characteristics, or Zcash that enable privacy, or potentially many other chains. And so we want all of them to provide those different capabilities. Then we want to distribute the data for the user. So we need projects like for instance, BigChainDB that is trying to transition into a more permissionless setting to serve the data. And then we need P2P messaging. So here there was not that much development. We are doing some research on Whisper and trying to push it a bit forward so that it's actually usable for developers when they develop their application. And then on top of that, we have those second layer protocols, so incentivizing storage, heavy computation like Golem, and encrypted storage, and so on. And then finally, we need we need something that when a developer sits down and wants to develop an application, we need an API that enables them to plug into all those different protocols underneath, right? So there's it's not enough to just plug into blockchain, but ideally we have an integrated environment that lets them to develop stuff across those protocols. And then we need languages to be developed as well for that, like Solidity or so here, for instance, one effort is to make the Solidity toolchain compatible with WebAssembly so that we don't have to redo a lot of the work that we did already with the Solidity toolchain, but also developing new languages, for instance, based on Rust. And then we need a browser that enables you to serve this application to the user. So ideally, this browser underneath would be running those protocols and then serving the applications to users. And yeah, ideally running it in a trust-free fashion. But then I mentioned all those different blockchains, and there is many new projects that are now coming up with new blockchains, and there is side chains and people bridging to Ethereum, and it's all great because it enables people to actually get their applications out there, run them at a reasonable cost, and potentially provide new types of capabilities. But most of the interesting stuff that is there in new blockchains. So if we think of projects like for instance, let's say Tezos, they provide an interesting state machine, but all the networking and all the consensus is the same kind of stuff that everyone else is trying to research and make. So it would be great if it would be much easier to create new chains like that are also light client compatible, so you can serve to users the applications that are running on them. So this is why the first implementation of Substrate was developed by Parity, but it's a more general protocol that is basically a shell that reduces overhead to build new blockchains. And the state transition is specified in this platform-neutral computation description language, WebAssembly. So it makes it just very easy to get it up and running, specify the state machine, and deploy a completely new chain. But then once we have all those new chains, and they provide all the different capabilities, we get again to the problem that people need to be running multiple different clients, and also we have a problem that the more chains we have, the more spread out the security is. So if there are mining communities that secure different chains, or even if the chains are proof of stake, the more chains we have, each of the chains has to do their ICO and has to have enough stake in order to be secure. So this is a big problem, especially as the number of chains is growing. So we need some way to secure all those different chains that are running. We need to make sure that they can communicate with each other, and that they can again run so that an application can make use of them while not running multiple chains at the same time. And this is why, like, the origin of the Polkadot project, to help to make that happen. So whatever the chain is and whatever capabilities it provides, Polkadot is built in order to be able to provide either full security for a given state machine, or enable that a chain with separate security to interact with the network. Or even if there is a consortium chain or a chain that is in a permission setting, you could also specify a bridge that enables it to communicate with Polkadot network. And this makes it easier to experiment with new chains while maintaining those security characteristics. And also the protocol is designed in such a way to be very flexible, so that as our changes, as our needs change, and we need to kind of have a new protocol that functions in a bit different way, we can adapt to it. So we really hope that kind of as part of this wider Web3 technology stack, those two protocols and foundations can help with experimentation. And just to mention, like, both of those are, like, you might know that the initial implementations are being done by Parity, but we are now engaging other teams to develop implementations of those protocols also in other languages, so that they are even more kind of community-led projects. And as I said, like, the key is to collaborate and make sure that we are all aware what we are aiming for. And application developers need to be aware how can they build decentralized applications and how to maintain those decentralized characteristics, and be aware which protocols they use that enable those applications to be used in a trust-free manner. We need browsers to integrate or be extensible to integrate multiple protocols that are fully featured and enable people to write fully featured applications. And we need APIs and languages that as well are able to not only cover kind of one set of needs of the developer, but are kind of encompass the whole thing. We need the higher level protocols that make it all a bit easier. So as we communicate across those different protocols, we need formats and standards that make it easier. In Ethereum, it's great with all the things like ERC20 and other standards that are really needed. Also, even more when we have this variety of protocols out there. So, just to go back a bit to what we try to do to help out with this mission. So we do some in-house research on a number of the topics that will make it easier to develop those protocols. So I already mentioned research on Whisper, but also on consensus algorithms and on other bits and pieces that are still a bit underdeveloped. Formal verification with collaboration also with externally with universities. We want to give grants and funding to develop either different pieces of this stack or the glue that makes it all come together, and also community efforts as well to educate people like what is it all about, and I guess the tooling falls into the accessibility initiatives and workshops. So making sure that people are actually aware what is a decentralized application, what qualities it should have. And how do we actually make it usable for people in a trust-free manner? So yeah, you can find out more at some of our different places where we are online, especially the Riot is a good place to chat and figure out how we can decentralize the web. All right, thanks.